Welcome to another teaching from perfectingtheworld.com.
Good evening, good to see you. We are continuing on the topic of the ger in the Torah, the contrasting types of ger in the Torah. And I'm responding today to a question that was received regarding what appears to be a contradiction in the text of the written Torah of the Humash. And this is a question that I have for myself spent a lot of time thinking through and working through the commentaries and the texts. And I understand that this seems to be a contradiction because, quite honestly, it's a contradiction by design. It's meant to be intention. It's meant to be understood intention. And by intention, I mean it's meant to have friction in these two different uses. Now, we're looking specifically at the use of the ger in Deuteronomy 14:21 compared to the use of the ger in Leviticus 17. And what we're going to find is that these texts give us interpretive framing for understanding how to identify the ger being used in each use of the ger throughout the Humash. Let's look at the contradiction first. We have Deuteronomy 14:21. This has been our primary passage here over the last few weeks. Lo tochelu kol nevela, do not eat any carcass. That is the carcass of an animal that was not given an appropriate altar level slaughter, a kosher slaughter. Lager asher b'sharecha titana wa'achla. You may give it to the stranger, the sojourner, who is at your gates, and he may eat it. As we've been pointing out, we see the Israelite who is prohibited from eating the nevela, and we have the sojourner, the ger, who in this passage is permitted to eat the nevela. Now, the contradicting passage is Leviticus 17, and it reads, "V'chol nefesh asher tochel nevela uterefa be'ezrach uv'ger v'kebes bagadav v'rachatz b'mayim v'tamei ad ha'arev v'tahir." Every person who eats nevela, that's our word nevela for the slaughtered or the unkosher slaughtered carcass, uterefa, and terefa would be the torn carcass. This is the carcass of the animal whose chaya, whose life was already in jeopardy. For example, it had a wound, or it was dying because of a wounding that is something other than a kosher slaughter. So, for example, if it died from a wound from an animal claw, if it died from a wound from a projectile, whether it be an arrow into the heart or into the lungs, or whether it be a bullet, and then bleeds out from the tearing of its flesh, or bleeds internally from the tearing of its flesh, at this point it is a prohibited terefa carcass. We know Alpei Shemua, based on the way that we've learned this passage in Judaism, that the nevela and the terefa hold a similar level of prohibition. We are permitted to benefit from them. We are permitted to give them to others who are not Israelites to eat. We are permitted to use their carcasses to feed or to derive benefit from. Now, if you have any further questions on the terefa, let me know. I'd be happy to further unpack that. Let me know in the comments below. Continuing here, it says whether the Ezrach, this is the native-born Israelite, Uva Ger, this is a sojourner. It says, Bagadavar rachatz b'mayim, he shall wash his clothes. This is making a tevila, making an immersion, and bathe himself in water. Watamei ad ha'arev, and he shall be in a state of ritual disqualification until the evening. Watahir, and then he shall be clean. It goes on to read, Wa'im lo yechabes uvasaro lo yirchatz wanasa awono. If he does not wash them, nor bathe his flesh, he shall bear his iniquity. This last verse, this is Leviticus 17:16, really gives us a lot of information here about the context. It says specifically that if this individual is not removing the ritual defilement, that they shall be in a state of iniquity. This is not the typical case. For example, today, if a person enters into a state of ritual defilement, there is not a need to remove the ritual defilement unless a person has a desire or a need to participate in the Avodath Hashem, in the tabernacle or the altar. If there is no need or desire to participate in the altar, there's also no need to remove the impurity. So why would this text specifically give concern for the removal of the impurity? You'll recall that we defined how Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are specifically focused on the centripetal force of the tabernacle in the midst of the children of Israel. There's a specific concern for guarding the purity, the holiness of the tabernacle, because that is where God's presence was being maintained. In contrast, Deuteronomy, which moves into the setting of the stationary sanctuary, removes the concerns for perpetual ritual purity. Just like today, we do not need to maintain ritual purity. But the food regulations are put into the context not of tabernacle purity, but into the context of covenantal identity. Now, when we look at how Leviticus 11, which is one of the primary food chapters, and this entire section of Leviticus 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are positioned canonically, they are specifically right before the peak of the Torah, the pinnacle of the Torah, the literary center of the Torah, which is Yom Kippur. That's also the literary center of the book of Leviticus. But as we climb up this mountain toward the canonical center of Leviticus and the Torah, the Humash, we are met with regulations regarding cleanness and uncleanness. And this section here begins with a verse that refers specifically to cleanness, uncleanness, and ends with a verse that refers to cleanness, uncleanness. It begins here with a concern, ol havdil ben kodesh uvein hachol uvein hatame uvein hatahor. There shall be separation between the holy and the profane, between the unclean and the pure. And this section ends here before we get into Yom Kippur with the concern here about defiling the tabernacle that's in the midst of the children of Israel. The concern here is that their tuma, their ritual contaminations and disqualifications will defile the dwelling, the Shekinah. The Mishkan here is the word Mishkane, the dwelling, the tabernacling of Hashem. And therefore, these ritual contaminations, again, here, this is the canonical order, Leviticus 11, animal sources of impurity. Leviticus 12, childbirth sources. Leviticus 13 and 14, skin conditions and domestic afflictions. And Leviticus 15, bodily emissions. These are regulations specifically for preventing the contamination of the tabernacle in the midst of the children of Israel. If these regulations only occurred in the context here canonically, one could readily make the case that the prohibition against pig was only related to tabernacle worship. In fact, it may be that before Sinai happened, that there was a prohibition against pig in the context of altar participation. But here specifically, the regulations, the concerns are altar maintenance, because the altar is in the midst of the children of Israel. This is part of why it's so relevant. It's so relevant that the dietary commandments get repeated outside of the tabernacle context, because they resituate and relocate these concerns outside of the tabernacle purity concern. Okay. So we've seen here how Leviticus 10 to 15:31, they are the bookends of these concerns for ritual purity. But now Leviticus 17 is also concerned with ritual purity, but it stands outside of this jurisdiction. We have Leviticus 16, which interrupts this canonical flow, and Leviticus 16 is about Yom Kippur, which is about removing the impurities from the camp. Leviticus 17 then goes into the regulations for the altar for the duration of the time that the children of Israel are in the wilderness for the 40 years. And during that time period, as you'll recall, every domestic animal, the goat, the sheep, the cow, had to be brought as a zavak to the tabernacle in the midst of the camp, and to the altar. So even though this stands outside of this literary unit, it's still an extension of it. It's still concerned with ritual contamination, which is why it speaks about bearing one's sin. The concern was if a person maintained ritual impurity while in the camp, that would potentially defile the tabernacle. And that is why there was a requirement to remove that ritual impurity. This is why Deuteronomy 12:15, it says the Tame and the Tahor can eat of it alike, meaning we do not need to maintain ritual purity now that we're in a situation of extended distance from the tabernacle, from the temple. But I do want to point out the ger of Leviticus 17 has an altar relationship. Okay, this ger is an altar registered ger. Part of how we know that is when the requirements are given here for the zavak, it says, Mibayith Israel, from the house of Israel, min ha-ger asher yagor batocham, and from the ger that sojourns among you. It says if he does not bring his zavak, it says asher ya'ale olah o zavak, if he does not bring his burnt offering or his zavak, al pathacho hel moed, to the door of the tent of meeting, lo yaveinu la'asototho, to offer it to Hashem, when nikrath ha'ish, he shall be cut off hahu miyamah, from his people. The very fact that this is an altar facing regulation shows that the ger of Leviticus 17 is altar registered. You can see here that the offense carries the weight of kareth, being cut off. A kareth consequence in the context of amongst the people is specifically an offense that applies to somebody who is part of Israel. This is the ger Pesach. This is the ger Yisrael. Other regulations in Leviticus 17 that situate this ger relative to the altar is the fact that, as just mentioned, the ger brings the olah or the zavak. The Israelite or the ger is prohibited from eating blood. The ger is again prohibited explicitly from eating blood. When hunting an animal who is not of the sheep, the goat, or the cow, the blood has to be poured out and buried, and that applies to the Israelite and to the ger. And then the concern here for the ger and the ezrak, which is the native born, eating the nevela or the terefa. Okay, again, the verse 15 is specifically in the context here of concern for ritual purity. Okay, a quick review of the zavak. A zavak is a covenantal meal. It's an offering that can only be brought by an Israelite. It's an offering that can only be brought by a circumcised Israelite. If a person is an Israelite but is not circumcised, they are not able to participate in the zavak. The zavak is a covenantal identity affirming meal. The fact that the ger in this passage is able to eat the zavak, it shows that they have a relationship to the mizbeach. They are specifically in a covenantal relationship that allows them to consecrate an animal, to perform a ritual slaughter, to allocate the pieces, the blood, the fat, and the portions for the Kohanim, and then they're able to eat it in a state of ritual purity. Okay, this is highly significant, and we see here, just for context, Exodus 12:48, speaking of the ger who is circumcised. Okay, wakiya gor itka ger, if there shall be a sojourner with you, wa'asa Pesach, and makes the Pesach, ladonai to Hashem, he shall circumcise his males, az yakriv, then he shall draw near to the mizbeach, to the altar, la'asotho, to make the Pesach offering. The Pesach offering is the zavach Pesach. Wahayaka ezrak, and then he's like the ezrak. The ezrak is the native born. The ger in this section is the ger who is altar registered. Now, again, let's contrast that to the ger b'shareka. The ger b'shareka is the ger who has been socially and judicially incorporated at the level of the gate. They are accountable to Israel's social order, but they do not have a relationship to the altar. The altar relationship is available with the appropriate boundary crossing, okay, with respecting the appropriate boundaries. The altar level is available to the Ezrach, that's the native-born Israelite. Okay, this is the individual who's born as a Jew, or to the Ger Pesach. This is the Ger who becomes an Israelite, also the Ger Mizbeach. This is the Ger who can make the Pesach, make the Passover, he can eat it. He has crossed the altar threshold of relationship. He is the Ger who is Ger Mizbeach, altar registered. He is the Ger Pesach, the Ger that eats the Pesach. In later language, this is called the Ger Zedek. The fulcrum, the stage of differentiation between the Ger Sha'ar at the gates and the Ger Zedek, the Ger who can eat the Pesach, specifically is woven around this idea of the Zavak. The Zavak is what describes the Pesach, the Passover. The Zavak is what describes the method of slaughter. But Zavachta ka'asher zebethek, you shall slaughter as I commanded you. When an individual has moved from the status of being the Ger Nevela or the Ger Sha'ar, the Ger who is socially visible to Israel's boundaries, when the person moves from that place into the place of being the Ger Pesach, at that point they are under the full responsibility of avoiding nevela. They cannot eat meat unless it has been given a kosher slaughter. And if they do eat nevela or terefa, they are ritually unclean. That's what Leviticus 17 is speaking about. What happens if the Ger or the Israelite, this is the Ger Pesach or the Israelite, both are Israelites, by the way, but what happens if they eat nevela or terefa? Why is that even being brought up? It's being brought up in the context of hunting. Because in the context of hunting, a situation not of sport but of duress in the ancient world, for most, that would have been a situation in which a person was at threat of potentially bringing home a nevela or a terefa. It's in that context that it's expressed that the ritual impurity of that carcass had to be dealt with in the context of the tabernacle community. If this is the only context in which we had the prohibition against nevela and terefa, literally, it would be possible to, by analogy, arrive at the conclusion that the nevela and the terefa were only prohibited in the context of the Mizbeach, of the tabernacle. It's because of Deuteronomy 14:21 that we are brought to understand that the prohibition against nevela is a covenantal prohibition. For it reads, Ki am kadosh l'Adonai Elohecha, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. Okay. The connection, as we've mentioned, between Leviticus and Deuteronomy, between the eating of the meat in the wilderness and the eating of the profane slaughter outside of the wilderness, is Zavach. The Zavach is what allows the meat to not be nevela. It is also the threshold at which a person is able to eat the Zavach Pesach. Okay, really important. As mentioned, if we didn't have this passage in Deuteronomy 14:21 that prohibits nevela outside of the ritual context and specifically places the reason for the prohibition in Ki am kadosh ata l'Adonai Elohecha, because you are a holy people to the Lord your God. If we didn't have this, it'd be very possible to read the entirety of the nevela prohibition as a prohibition that relates only to the tabernacle and to the Mizbeach and to the altar. Now, I want to leave you with a very provocative thought. We've spent some time looking at this passage. This is Isaiah 56. It reads, Ashrei Eno Sha'aseh Zoth. Happy is the man that does this. Ben Adam, the son of man, Yachazek Ba, who lays hold of it. Shomer Shabbat, Mechalo, who protects the Sabbath from profaning it. Shomer Yado Me'asoth Korah, and he keeps his hand away from doing anything that's evil. Al Yomer Ben Hanechar, let not the son of the foreigner, Hal Noel Al Adonai, who has joined himself to Hashem, Lemor say, Havdil Yavdeleni Adonai Me Alamo, surely Hashem has separated me from his people. Al Yomer Hasaris, Hein ani et yavesh. And let not the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. We're jumping ahead a couple of verses here, just one or two. Uvenei hanechar hanelim al Adonai l'shartho, o lahava es shem Adonai layoth lo la'avadim. Also the sons of the foreigner, this is the individual who is not born an Israelite, who joins himself to Yod-Heh, Wah-Heh, to serve him and to love the name of Hashem, to be his servants, Kol, Shomer, Shabbat, all that protect the Sabbath, Mechalo, from profaning it, Umehazakim, Beverithi, and they hold fast of my covenant. Now look at what happens here. This is profound. This is profound. This is verse 8, 7 or 8. V'haviotham al har kachi, I will bring them to my holy mountain. V'shemachtim b'veit tefilathi, I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Olothehem v'zivchechem laratzon al mizbeche, their burnt offerings and their zevach offerings shall be accepted upon my altar. Ki beithi beith tefila yekara l'kol ha'amim, for my house should be called a house of prayer of all peoples. What's fascinating about this is a future reference. This is likely the Yemoth Mashiach, the era of the dynasty of Mashiach. Okay, this is the time of peace when the knowledge of God will fill the world. It says that the temple will be a house of prayer for all peoples. But the most dramatic observation in this passage is it says that their zavak offering shall be accepted upon my altar. What does that tell us? There's more than one passage in the prophets that speaks to this, but it's speaking of the fact that these sons of the foreigners who have joined themselves to Hashem, to serve him, to love his name, to profane the Shabbat, that God's going to establish them within Israel as Israelites. Let them not say, God will surely separate me from his people. Okay? It appears to me that for whatever reason, like the Sarim, like the Saris, not the Sarim, but the Saris, the eunuchs, who are not able to have children, God will establish a name for them despite the fact that they can't have children. And for some reason, we have the son of the Nechar, the son of the foreigner, the son of a foreign god, who apparently is unable to join themselves to the nation of Israel. That God is going to establish them within Israel to the point that he's accepting their zavach offerings on their temple. And this is what it means for the temple to be called a house of prayer for all peoples. This is really, it's quite profound, quite profound. It's very far reaching. So the question we're going to ask here, and I'm going to challenge you to put your answer here in the comments. I'm going to challenge you to like this video, to share it, to subscribe. What changes when the ger moves from Israel's gate to Israel's altar? What happens when the ger moves from the gate to the altar? What happens with that transition? We are learning the fundamental grammar of Torah over ascent, about boundaries. These are really important learnings that we see two major errors happen in the world. On the one side, we see a large portion of the world that denies these boundaries exist, and they theologize the abolition of these boundaries. On the other side, we have a community who's been under siege physically and theologically for over 2,000 years, and we have blockaded those boundaries, and we've made very firm gates. Neither side is holding in a way that's consistent with the prophets and the prophetic horizon. And in both cases, I am calling both to recognize the Torah's vision of universal worship and the prophetic horizon of universal proximity. God's desire is to elevate the world with the highest level of kedusha, of holiness, and that's not going to be achieved with minimal, quote, ethical monotheism. It's going to be achieved through kedusha, through holiness, and through ascent. Tomorrow evening, we have our next session of the NT project. We're looking deeply at the meaning of emunah, fidelity, and pistis, which also means fidelity and allegiance. We are going to be challenging some of the the theological claims that a person can die on behalf of another person's sins. Okay, this is going to be very important to our reading of how we are working through Paul, and we're also continuing to unpack Amunah and Pistis. I would like to invite you to join us tomorrow. You can register at perfectingtheworld.com and become part of our private learning group on Thursday evenings. And registration will give you access to all of our learnings and all of our archives. It'll give you an opportunity to be ahead of what is happening in the world. As I keep saying, the traditional Christian and Jewish vocabularies do not have the tools to respond to what's coming. We are placing you ahead of the curve and giving you an opportunity to have a seat and to belong and to look with patience at the difficult questions that both you are asking and that the text requires of us to ask. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. You can register at perfectingtheworld.com. Have a good night.
Join the perfectingtheworld.com community today.